still there. Oh, he's coming back. Coming back.
It's a whole new thing. You know, for years I preached river fishing and how to fish a river. And I'm 83 years old and I'm learning all over again. What I always used to tell people, cast upstream, retrieve downstream in river.
Sure, and just kind of let it tumble down with the current,
Yeah,
right?
it comes with the current. Food comes with the current. But I was probably instructing them to get down on the bottom in these zones, and I didn't even know it. It was you're using a jig, that ugly bug that we made back in 1968. That's a river walking jig. You know, it would get down on the bottom and it would walk through the rocks. Well, it was actually going through these quiet areas. You described them as what? Stagnant water?
Oh yeah, stagnant or way significantly less current, you know, where it would just kind of be unpredictable. So it'd pick up and then it would dissipate again, you know, just kind of non-existent, just laying there.
So yeah, and you touched on this a minute ago, but another thing that I was really wondering about is how big are these slack water zones?
There's a zone up here we discovered 2 days ago. We were out trying out another new lure, and above the power plant up here there's a stretch of about 1/4 mile of river, and that whole stretch is covered with one huge zone.
Like how long are you talking?
Well, we're talking 300 yards.
Yeah.
Yes. It's amazing. It just blew my mind. And it's actually an ideal area to catch catfish. And we've always caught catfish in this spot, and we never realized why they hung in there. I want to ask your audience that's watching this, have you ever had the problem of getting down to fish and getting down on the bottom? That's the key to this whole thing. If you've got to get down to the bottom, we'll show you in film that these fish are hanging in that zone area, and they're not working at all. Their tail is barely moving. We've also we've discovered, if I can, I'm not a scientist by any means, but we've found zones that are this deep, and then the one thing that we've discovered in the last year and the last 2 years working the rivers is above the zones is a very turbulent area where current is thrashing like this.
And the way you discovered that, you told me, is that you were trying to film your lures as you test them.
Yeah.
And whenever you bring it up out of the zone of slack water, that it becomes
crazy.
real unpredictable in terms of which way it's going to
thrown all over the place, and then it's out of the frame, and you've got to try to figure out how to get it back in the frame, but the current is just crazy, so hard to.
If you watch bass in that spot, Annie's running the camera, of course, and she's trying to catch up those fish. They'll come up and they're doing this, chasing that lure, but they always come in out of the zone.
They come in fast, amazingly fast, and either they'll take your lure and then you've got them, or they'll swipe it, you know, or do a drive-by and they're gone again, but it's always quick, always quick.
Because maybe they don't want to spend a lot of time in the stronger current, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Then above that, that runs from 6 to 12 inches of that turbulent water above the zone. Above that is steady current. Then the lure, you bring it up into that and it runs steady. It won't be flashing around. So I got to tell you, we've got a lot to learn yet. There's a lot that we don't know, and we've been experimenting, but we're finding that if anglers will utilize the techniques that we're telling them about, they'll increase their catch of fish dramatically. I mean, 100% over what they've been catching.
So that is exactly what I wanted to ask you next. What are the lessons to us as anglers? What should we do to take advantage of the fact that we, thanks to you two, know that these slack water zones exist out in the main part of the channel?
You catch fish on the shorelines all summer long. But if you're a smallmouth bass fisherman, you'll catch lots of them like this. The bigger fish are out, and maybe only 50 feet offshore where these zones start. But remember, fish go to where food is, and food seems to hold in these zone areas in the middle of the river.
Given the fact that when we go out fishing, we're not going to have Annie's sophisticated underwater camera gear with us, how are we going to find these slack water zones, or what should we do in an effort to feel like we are, you know, you look at these rivers and it's a lot of territory out there. How do I know when I'm fishing where there might be one of these slack water zones?
Well, let's break it down into two parts. The rapid area, the fast rapid area like behind us, or the sluggish areas where the surface is smooth. If you're in the smooth part, I would oversize my bait. Instead of using a 16th or an 1/8 ounce jig, I'd go to a 1/4 or 3/8, and I'd work upstream, real slow. And the slower you work, just so you're going ahead of the current. And once you find a spot, I mark it by trees on the shoreline. I don't know, guys got GPSs and all that fancy stuff. I don't use it anymore. I go back to my childhood and I look at a tree. I got a big elm on the shoreline that's fallen down. In front of that, 50 yards offshore, I hit fish. That's my indicator. If you've got a locator, you'll find a regular locator will show you the structure on the bottom. And if you've got any erratic structure on the bottom, it's a good spot to look for these zones, because these rocks the size of, even a rock the size of this right here. Oh, Annie, I should have you getting this for me.
You got it.
That will create a zone. This could be the start of a zone that ends up 10 feet wide and 30 feet long.
Off of a rock that small?
That small, yeah. You don't have to have a huge rock to do that with.
So really the broken rock areas might be key areas, because perhaps that's where all of this friction that they're talking about is increased, maybe because of so much broken bottom, huh?
You're right.
And in a sandy area, do you think it can be key, where you have almost that dune-like appearance of the bottom as opposed to a real super smooth bottom? Or do you think that what do you think about that?
Well, the sandy areas and the mud areas that we found zones, for instance, the Wisconsin River that all your viewers are familiar with, is a lot of sand, but they got a lot of clay drops. They got a shelf of clay, and it may only drop 2 inches. And
like one of those figures that you drew for us, had such a drop, I believe,
these clay shelves will start a zone too. But remember, I told you, I haven't learned everything that to be learned about this. I'll probably die before I learn it all.
Well, hopefully not. So how excited were you when you saw that spinner blade stop and asked yourself, how come, and noticed that there were all these fish out there?
Well, over time, we started to realize that it took a little while, like several trips out. Like, there's something odd going on down there. Why is it not consistently whoosh like you'd expect? And so it took a few trips out to start putting 2 and 2 together. Like, that's just not a big boulder causing some still or quieter water. It's
the classic notion is the big boulder in the stream where there's a slack zone right in front of it at the bottom, and then the kind of eddy effect coming around the outside, and then a small slack water zone right behind the rock. But what you're talking about is a greatly expanded zone of slack water, right? So one thing I want you to tell us more about too is, remember we were talking about how, like according to the scientific literature, this zone of no current is microscopically thin at the bottom of the river, but you're holding your hands apart, and I think I heard you say that you have found places where you can film this spinner on the spin bee not going around as high as maybe 20 or 24 inches off the bottom. Like, tell me how high does this zone seem to stretch, at least during the warmer months of the year?
I don't think it's quite as much as 20, do you? I think like 12
we
to
found
16.
on the Goku we
maybe.
found 20 inches, but remember that spinner on the back of a spin bee is running rapid up here. You drop into that place between the current and the zone, and you get that craziness out of it, and then down. But we were running zones up there about that long, that deep.
So
But
it
that
could
was a
be
pretty
16 to
rocky river,
18
too.
inches maybe in
Could
some
be
cases. Or
at the most, I would think, yeah. So
Most of them are 6 inches.
the other takeaway is get your bait on the bottom, right?
Yes, yes. Walleye fishermen always say, I've heard it for years, you got to get down to the bottom to catch walleyes. In a river, we finally discovered why. You got to get down. And the other thing that we noticed on shooting camera is that walleyes will not come up through that turbulent water above the zone to hit a bait.
The bass might, but the walleyes won't. Is that
Yes,
right?
that's right. Bass will come up, especially small bass. You'll get them coming up and banging the baits all the time. But big fish seem to hang in that zone, and it kind of follows through with what I've said in the past. If you want to get the big fish, you got to get to the bottom. And I didn't know why, to be very honest with you. Now we've discovered in the last 5 years, we've discovered why. The other thing is that you'll find them as the food disperses. Remember, fish go to the food, no matter where they are in the river. So we know that they left the shoreline, the walleyes left the shoreline, they went out. If they find a zone area that's 30 feet long, the minnows may be in the back end of it or in the front end of it. So wherever the food is, that's where they're going to go. So the marking of the tree is important on shoreline. When you hit a fish, remember where you're at.
Or if you're a newfangled fisherman, you could punch it in as a waypoint, couldn't
by
you?
golly, don't be using that locate, that GPS, huh?
Yeah, we've got a spot down here in the lower river, below here about 3 miles, that every fall the smallmouth come in, and we can, using big red-tailed chubs and with a 1.5 ounce bait walker, and we caught 29 of them 2 years ago that went from 4 to 6 pounds.
Annie, I think you wrote something
Yeah.
about that for us in Midwest Outdoors, right?
Yeah.
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 And they, so that's a spot, and we haven't checked it yet this year.
It's a little early. Yeah. Usually in October is when that fishery turns on and is so phenomenal.
Yeah, I think the bass are coming up in there to feed on the red-tailed chubs, or the river chubs is what they're feeding on. We would have never found what we're talking about if it hadn't been that tail spinner on that spin bee. That little lure, we were worried. We field tested this thing for 3.5 years before we put it on the market. And it's got a tail spinner on it, and I was worried that fish would come up and come
Hit
off
the
of it.
spinner too much, right?
Yeah,
Or-
they would interfere, the spinner would interfere. We have never found that to be the truth. We find bluegills, crappie, walleyes, bass, you name it.
and
pike,
red horse.
And red horse, yes. That's the other thing. When you use this lure in smaller, we're working on a whole new deal that I told you about, and fishing rough fish with this kind of a bait. But that back spinner is the attractor, and when you get them in too close, let me show it. Give me those crawlers, honey.
Oh.
There's two things. You need scent. You can tip these with a little piece of crawler, night crawler, or
You were
Eggs.
saying like a 3/8 inch piece of night crawler is all you were using.
about 3/8 of an inch, and so it doesn't interfere with the spinner. Or a minnow head. or one of these red balls, which is an anise egg. That's become a
I can smell the anise from here, as a matter
Yeah,
of
black
fact.
licorice, it's always good.
yeah that's a really good little winter bait. They tip it for perch and for everything, you know, on jigs. But we found that if you tip it with on a summer jig, they work as well. Smell has a lot to do with it. You get the attraction of the spinner to draw the fish in or out of the zone, and the smell just embraces the ability to strike.
And probably causes them to be a little more determined in hanging on to it or finishing, bringing it in their mouth or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Sealing the deal.
Yeah.
Sealing the deal, you got it.
I have one more question for you.
All right.
What about muskies? Have you seen muskies and
we
or
haven't-
pike at
we
the
haven't-
bottom in these zones?
We've got muskies in this river, but they're caught accidentally, normally on one of our ugly bugs or one of these spin bees. I have no idea, but I can't see that they'd be any different. On the river, muskies will hold at the front of an island, and the current is busting around the island. There's a zone area in the front, and I would imagine that's where they're holding. I haven't purposely gone after muskies. I'm not a 1,000-a-day caster man, so I like more action. I'd rather fish suckers and carp.
So what were you about to say a minute ago?
Okay, there's one other thing that we're just learning. You get ripples like this. You get a rapid area where you've got water that's only this deep down to that deep, rapids or rapid areas. We're finding, you think about it, catfish come up into that to feed, and they hold there for hours. Walleyes do the same, bass do the same. Why are they there and how are they there? I believe that we're researching it right now, that there's small zones that are created in multiple, hundreds of them.
Even though the current is like super fast at the top.
Yeah, you got
and
super
that's-
fast current, and no fish in his right mind is going to be able to swim against it forever. Why are they there and how do they hold?
That's a question for, like, if you fish those high mountain streams in Colorado, Montana, Wyoming, sometimes the flow in those rivers, they're narrow and it's just smoking down the hill. But there's trout in there and you can catch them on flies, and you think to yourself, where are these fish sitting that they're not using up every calorie in their body within a half an hour, you know? But they're
So
there.
I believe these rapid areas are full of little zones, and we were working it here earlier this summer, and we've come to the conclusion that's what it is. There's lots of little rocks, like I've got below my feet here, that help make these zones, and they may only be this deep, but they'll hold a 10-pound catfish. He's able to sit in the bottom and hold on without working too hard.
Yeah, that's the thing that's pretty striking to me, that what you've found when you look at these fish, that their fins are relaxed and they're out in the middle of the river basically at the bottom, and they don't appear to be expending any energy to stay there. And so you would suspect that, like we were saying, if you look in the literature, it sounds like the height of such a zone would never be able to hold a good sized fish that you would want to catch. You know, it's thinner than a potato chip, but this is new news to fishermen.
Well, even if the zone is only 4 inches deep, a 10-pound walleye can stick his nose on the bottom and the current goes over the top of him.
Sure, it becomes just like the air going over the hood of a car or something like that, right?
Well, we've discovered that in all of these fish. When we found them on the scope or on the lens of the underwater camera, a lot of them will be nosed into the bottom when the zone is shallow. So they're able to hold there with little effort. And once again, food comes with the current, gets into these zones, and they're able to feed. It's a lot less effort to chase a minnow in a zone than it is on a fast current along the shore.